Here we are. Both of us we're not 22 anymore. We have this next group of founders coming up in B2B software. What would be your one piece of advice you'd give those guys or those women who are going out and trying to build something right now?
Don't quit. And I think that's what you and I have done, Paul. And sometimes it takes a couple of ventures, in many years.
Yeah, that's maybe a lot in a long time. Yeah.
But I think we've both done that, right? And ultimately, I have found, these entrepreneurial adventures, although they take many twists and turns, many ups and downs, right? I think ultimately it's very gratifying. And most entrepreneurs, and I think you and I have done this, usually you find a way to success.
Yeah.
And I would say keep going. And then the other thing I had said earlier is focus even more on your customers because they will guide you. I wish I'd done that even more earlier, because if you can really focus on your customer, really listen to them, really deliver the ROI to them, then usually eventually the business will come around.
Godard Abel, just a delight to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, fun to be here with you, Paul.
So I was really looking forward to this because you and I met for the first time in Boulder. Both of us arguably far from our chosen range of Silicon Valley or the other huge tech hubs. Of course, Boulder's growing in that way. And it was out of context. And we met socially, obviously. And then we got to know each other a little bit. And one of the things that I wanted to open with is that the term serial entrepreneur gets thrown around a lot. And in a world where people are willing to take even a failure and try to spin it up into a success, you are a true serial entrepreneur. You have done this. It wasn't luck because you managed to do it again and again. And I wanted to start there and start at the beginning a little and talk about when you got going and your first company before you knew everything you know now, and the impact of, and you were sort of in the maelstrom of the the tech boom and bust. But let's start there and talk a little bit about when you were beginning your first company and you're really trying to get going, the impact that those capital markets and that moment had on your ability to be able to scale a business.
Yeah, and I think one thing you and I have in common, Paul, we've both been building companies for many years. And we've seen the ups and the downs. And I think you and I both lived through probably the biggest up and down cycle ever, the dot-com boom and bust.
Yeah.
And that was right when I was also starting my first company, at the end of 1999. And it was just this dot-com explosion. And at the time, I think we were both in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. I just finished business school at Stanford. And I think in 1999, if you had any entrepreneurial blood, and you were in and around Stanford, you're in the Bay Area, you were probably going to start a company. And I remember just out of my business school class at Stanford, I think there were 42 startups and there were only about 330 students.
Wow.
And it was a tremendous time to be, and kind of what I was, kind of a young, clueless, in hindsight, pretty naive entrepreneur, because it was this tremendous dot-com boom. And investors were very willing to bet on, young and inexperienced teams because the internet was brand new. And I also remember that whole dot-com boom had started in 1995 when Netscape went public. Mark Andreessen, obviously still infamous today now as a co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, but he really also kicked off the internet boom when they commercialized the web browser at Netscape. And I think that company, Netscape, went public at a $3 billion valuation in 1995. And then there were just a few years. And they were also losing money, and so I think people were talking about the new economy, and the new economy meant, pre-revenue startups could raise millions of dollars. Companies, I remember I was part of another startup, Niku, that went public in 1990, beginning of 2000. They went public March 2000 at the peak, but I think it had 20 million revenue run rate, went public at a $10 billion market cap. And so it was just, crazy time. And, so in some ways a great time to start a company because I decided to start my company, Big Machines, to help manufacturers like my father sell their pumps online. And, it seemed like a great time to start. And I was able to raise like 20 million bucks. And I told you also from some famous people like John Scully, who maybe is also infamous, but also famous. He was the CEO of Apple who took over when Steve Jobs got thrown out. But at the time he was still quite famous. And once I got him on board, people were just willing to throw money at us. And so we decided to get started, right at the beginning of that peak.
Well, it's so funny you should mention that. One of the things that I think is different in the other booms that we've had subsequent to that is and maybe not so much true now with the AI boom, but the difference between revenue, which often was coming from other VCs, other venture-backed companies, right? We had that little washing machine running, but the difference between the amount of revenue and the market caps in the early days of the internet was incredible. And you built your skill of being able to tell a great story, and you still can do that. I've seen you do it. But one question related to that, and you have an important distinction here, which is you started late. A lot of people got started in '99. That was the end. They never really found their way through. And you had an unusual situation, which is you were able to not only get past that, raise the money, but then with the bust, keep going and get an outcome. Tell us a little bit about how that happened. And in particular, how did you think about figuring out how to take that initial promise, right, and turn it into a business that actually had real enterprise value, even in light of a very, very tough macro environment?
And you're right, Paul, it went into tremendous bust. And I remember 2001, this was a little over a year after we started our company, it totally went the other way. And I remember everyone even saying Amazon was just a credit risk. And I think Bezos is still mad at, I don't remember the Wall Street analyst's name, but they were, as a credit analyst, they were just betting when Amazon was going to go bankrupt. And Amazon obviously was still a fast grower, but they, lost a ton of money their first few years in business. And they also took on, I think, about $500 million in debt. And everyone was betting, when's Amazon going to go bust? And of those 42 startups I mentioned out of my Stanford Business School class, I think 38 did go out of business. And what happened to almost all of us, we all assumed, raised our first rounds, maybe 99, end of 99, beginning of 2000. We all thought, in a year we'll raise our next round, right? And it'll be easy, just like it is now. But it completely changed, because by the end of 2000, all the VCs, everyone got scared. The public companies blew up. And those companies you talked about with absurd, probably 200x revenue multiples. And even some companies were going public, I think almost essentially zero revenue. And it very quickly blew up in the public markets, and then the private markets just froze. And I remember at the end of 2000, I was looking to raise more money, and I was going up and down Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley, and people would listen politely, but nobody would fund us or really fund anything. They were all just trying to save a few portfolio companies. And so it turned into a real bloodbath. And I think even worse for us, we had decided that big machines to target manufacturers. And our customers also, I remember, especially after 9/11 also happened, which was 9/11, 2001, obviously infamous date with the terror attack. But then it also kind of froze the whole economy. And so we're calling out manufacturers at the end of 2001, I remember, and they would kind of politely listen. But at the end of the meeting, they'd be like, hey, the internet was a fad. We're actually happy sending our product data on CD-ROMs, paper catalogs to our distributors and our customers. So the internet's not happening. And by the way, we think you're going bankrupt. So it's kind of like, get out of my office, before the door hits you. Exactly. And as a result, I remember our business plan, and we were trying to target, decent sized manufacturers. I think in 2001, my business plan was to do at least 20 deals in kind of our second year in business. Next year is to do 40. And I think we wound up doing 2 deals in 2001, 3 deals in 2002. And we burned through 19 of 20 million. So by the time 2003 came around, we were pretty much bankrupt. And we had $1 million left. And I remember my co-founder, Chris, and we just sat down in 2003 and had like a come to Jesus meeting. Like, what do we do? Do we just give back the $1 million? And before business school, I was a consultant. He was an engineer. We were best friends from MIT. And, we're kind of like, hey, what do we do? Do we just find jobs as engineers, consultants, or can we find some way to make this thing work? And honestly, at the time, we didn't know what was going to be the right decision. But I think the reason we didn't quit, one, we just didn't want to quit on each other. We were best friends from college, same major, same fraternity. And so we didn't want to quit on each other. And we recruited 3 of our best friends. So we didn't want to make everyone jobless. And then secondly, we did have about a dozen early customers. And we were clearly in the chasm, Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm model, where we'd found some early adopter manufacturers. And I think the reason we did persevere, that dozen that did believe in us, we'd actually made the solution work for them. And their distributors or customers were able to place orders online. It was 90% faster, error-free, right in their back-end system. It was still a bit slow on the front end, because a lot of users were still on dial-up internet, but we're like, hey, if we get this thing stood up, online ordering, online quoting, it is actually a lot better than the old way. So if we can find a way to persevere, this technology will cross the chasm and one day it'll hit mainstream. So, so we did decide to keep going, but we had to cut the company from 70 to 20 people, 3 painful rounds of layoffs. And you've been through that, letting a lot of good people go. Totally wasn't their fault. We just, invested too fast. So that was super painful and humbling. But then, we cut it down to 20 people and we're like, let's just focus on sales. And kind of one deal at a time, within a year, we were able to get to cash flow positive and just keep going. But it really didn't become a good business till 2007, 7 years in. And finally, the market did cross the chasm where all of a sudden it became called cloud. And I have to thank Mark Benioff and Salesforce. They really popularized the cloud, made it mainstream, and we became their partner because as Salesforce moved upstream in CRM, all of a sudden they needed, what eventually was called CPQ, they needed a partner to help large enterprises do quoting and ordering in the cloud. And we were already there. So eventually it turned out, and it started really growing. And then, 2012 or 13, the company was bought by Oracle for $400 million because we were also a Siebel partner. So it all ended well, but it was, 7 years of, I think, what Ben Horowitz calls the struggle. And you've been on the struggle. And, when you feel like you're failing every day. You're failing your co-founders. My dad was my first investor, my first customer. I was losing his money. I was ruining my friends' careers. I was ruining my career. At the same time, we had twins who came premature. So home life was filled with anxiety. And honestly, for a few years there, I was just kind of in a fog of anxiety, fear, and doubt. And I think Ben Horowitz, and the hard thing about hard things, talks about it so well, but the struggle, that fog that some of us entrepreneurs have lived in. But luckily, we came out the other side.
Well, it's so funny you should mention. First of all, that's amazing story for a couple of key reasons. One is it's such a game of inches, isn't it? I mean, it really there's so many times during that period, and I certainly had that in a lot of my startups too, where you're like, I don't know, this could be the last day. I'm short $200,000. I got 3 weeks to get it, or whatever that was, and you're like, and then the anxiety and the pain, that's a real thing about, every once in a while, and I know people, and I know people like this who essentially never had it just worked all the way through. But almost most people I know who end up making big things, there's suffering involved, and figuring out how to keep going is a really hard thing. So what do you think was if there was one thing you could pass along to a first-time operator when they were in that fog, how do you figure out if you keep going? How do you figure out whether or not you keep going?
Yeah. And I think it's a very personal decision because it does affect all of you. And when you have that struggle, I call it like a storm cloud of anxiety, fear, anxiety, and doubt in your forehead. Like you kind of can't turn it off. That's what's hard. Even when I was with my wife, Stacy, or our kids, like the business fog never went away. And so it is really taxing personally. And I do think, whether you keep going or not, and I think the only thing I wish I'd probably focus on even more was from the business standpoint, the customers, and even that's kind of what got us out of it when we focused even more on the customers and making sure, and we didn't have that many. So in some ways it's easier, but if you really focus, one, make the product work for them. And then I also, at that time, at least in B2B, just focus even more on the next deal on the table, the next customer I can win. And actually at the end of 2003, when we did that reset after we laid off all the people, I remember that was very simplifying. I'm like, I'm just going to focus on the next deal and we were getting $100,000 to $200,000 checks, with each deal. And those could fund us for, a couple of months, the whole company. So that actually became very clarifying. And also it really focused you on the customer because you really have to listen to the customer. Like, what do they really want, right? How do we really have to build and deliver the product and the value? And probably my first 3 years, and I'd been also a McKinsey consultant, MBA, right? I was probably a bit too theoretical. And I tried to too soon just hire VP of sales, sort of, outsource it. But I think and then I think the customers will also tell you, because the reason we kept going is it was working for the early customers. And at least in B2B, usually if you're creating ROI value for the customers, in our case, the quote order process was 90% faster, and that was saving them millions of dollars a year. Then you're like, hey, even if the technology market fit isn't there yet, if you can create that kind of ROI for one customer, And, there's some TAM there. It's in an industry and there's thousands of manufacturers on the world. Then we're just like, okay, eventually, this thing should catch on. That was, I think that was why we decided to persevere. And, but I think it's hard, and maybe sometimes quitting is the right answer. Like we didn't, but it's a hard decision.
But it's funny because you are a world-class product guy. And I wonder, you learned, that's as tough a business school class as there ever is because, Stacy's at home going, what the hell? But that to me, I think that's a through line, which gets thrown around, but is so critical is product market fit, true product market fit. Like somebody's willing to write a check when they don't have, because it wasn't just the tech world that was really suffering at that moment. It was more in the tech world, but like nobody was like, hey, we got tons of money. The private and public capital markets generally are pretty sketchy in 2002, 3, 4. So if somebody's writing you a check for $200,000, they're getting a real benefit out of it. And I wonder, do you think because I think this was your nature anyway, but do you think it helped as a young person as an operator to be like, wait a minute, the only way I can survive is to work with customers and try to find real value? Do you think that was part of it?
Yes. And honestly, it also kind of sounds obvious. And maybe that was also the problem with being able to raise $20 million. That first year in the dot-com boom before even having customers. I think in some ways we all unlearned that the industry, maybe that basic lesson of capitalism, right? That at the end of the day, customers have to write you checks for your product or service, or else there's no value there. And so we probably got too decoupled for it. And also it was interesting. I remember when I got my MBA at Stanford late 90s, there was no class on sales.
Is that true?
Yeah. There were classes on everything else, right? Finance, accounting, strategy, operations. But and certainly I think in any B2B business, and you've built B2B businesses, like if you don't do sales, right? And sales also, it gets a weird, dirty connotation, but really I think it's a very noble profession, because a good salesperson, you're just listening to the customer, figuring out their needs and then mapping your solution to it. And obviously also figuring out the value of it. And then obviously charging them less money than you're creating value, right? So it's just a way to align with the customer. And, but I think that was also, one thing we did not have in business school.
Well, this whole thing about, I know you do, and I do, we talk to entrepreneurs all the time, and now it's not a problem, but anytime there's a boom going, people, conflate raising money with making money. Right. And this idea of like, it's a market top when you see something in the information or wherever, or the Business Insider, which is it's $1 billion company. It's like, no, that's it. They raised $1 billion, right? And that's different.
It might be a $5 million company.
Exactly. And then you begin to understand the difference. But I think, looking at, you did this 3 times, where you're 2 times and you're in the middle of one that's going to be, by every measure, an incredible success. Product market fit. You were able to do that again. I presume that lesson you took from what you'd done at Big Machines when you did Steelbrick and now G2, really focusing on that product market fit. That's been a discipline of yours. Is that fair to say?
Yes. No, and I learned it the hard way. And then, once Oracle acquired Big Machines, we decided to build another one, another CPQ, configure, price, quote. And the second one was so much easier, just because we spent 13 years on the first one. And frankly, when we started the second one, 2014, there was clear product market fit. And we helped create this category of CPQ. So by 2014, there were companies just shopping for cloud CPQ. And so Steelbrick was much easier because all we said was we called it CPQ made simple. Because frankly, the first one we built Big Machines, in hindsight, we made it too complicated. And it was a very heavy implementation and only very large enterprises could afford it. Because not only did you have to pay at least $200,000 a year for the software, you probably had to spend $500,000 implementing it. And so then we said, hey, let's make another one. We built it purpose-built for Salesforce. And also by 2014, it was clear Salesforce was going to win in CRM. So they had the biggest CRM installed base. And we'd also seen that most companies, after they do the basic CRM, the Salesforce automation, contact account management, then they would want to automate their front-end processes, quoting and ordering. And we knew, so the second one, we knew how to build a product. We knew the market. And frankly, I also brought the sales team over. Matt Gorniak kind of became my business partner because in those years of struggle at Big Machines, I actually hired him. I don't think I told him how bad the business was, but I hired him like in 2004 at the, kind of the peak of my struggle. And I remember I kind of sold Matt. He was a young guy. He was a GE at the time in one of their leadership development programs, but I think he was just bored of a big company. And I told him, hey, Matt, if you can help me figure out how to sell this thing, you can be my sales leader, CRO, and it'll be great, But when he joined, I'm like, here's a phone. He's like, where's the leads? I'm like, there aren't any. How do you sell this? I don't know. Here's the phone. And he helped me figure it out, And then he did become my CRO, built a team. But he also came with me into the second company, Steelbrick, and we brought our best sales reps. And so we knew how to sell that product. And we actually partnered with an entrepreneur, CTO, Max Rudman, who actually had already built a better mousetrap for the Salesforce platform. And then, that one, we scaled it from, pretty much zero revenue to 16 million ARR in less than 2 years. And it had such a good trajectory that Salesforce had already invested in a couple of times. And, but they decided to acquire us just 2 years into that journey because they also saw just a tremendous product market fit. And then their premise, which turned out to be true post-merger, obviously adding Steelbrick, it became Salesforce CPQ, but putting it in their channel, thousands of sales reps, they would be able to sell it to thousands of customers. And I think that worked, where eventually Salesforce CPQ, I think now has thousands of 7,000 customers.
Wow.
And, but that second one, everything we learned, right? And obviously we had that sales focus, that customer focus at Steelbrick from day one. And, we knew how to sell it. So I think it was pretty unique and lucky as an entrepreneur to kind of get to do the same thing again and just do it better.
So let's come back to something you said, because I think it's really interesting. What you did at Big Machines and obviously with Steelbrick, the ability to think about what was happening in the ecosystem and where to latch on and partnerships, right? Or what platform to latch on. How did you guys, did you luck into it a little with Big Machines with the rise of SaaS, or help us understand kind of, were you guys really purposeful in saying, wait a minute, we think here's how we're going to evaluate where we're going to take this and have it, because that sounded like, particularly for Big Machines, that was a critical part of the success, is being able to get on into those both into Siebel and Salesforce's ecosystem. Is that right?
Yeah, and we did. Honestly, the first one, we weren't sure who was going to win. Part of the reason we wanted to partner with Salesforce is actually Big Machines were an early customer. And most people don't remember this about Salesforce, but now they think, Salesforce is a big, heavy enterprise CRM. But when Salesforce started, Mark Benioff started Salesforce in 1999, also in San Francisco. And his initial go-to-market was actually Mark Benioff going to .com launch parties in San Francisco. And he was literally doing this, and he was just, because all these startups, some of them, needed CRM, would raise millions of dollars, and he would go to the launch party, hand out his business card and say, hey, I'm Mark Benioff from Salesforce. I've got a better CRM. You can't afford Siebel yet. It'll take you too long to stand it up. Just put it on Salesforce, all online with your credit card. I'll just charge you. At the time, it was like, $60 a user a month, and you're up and running, no implementation. And that worked great with the .coms. We were one of those. Like I think he came by our San Francisco .com party, or one of, it was just a small world at that time. And we're like, there's no way we can do Siebel. Let's do Salesforce. And I think, and we at the time, we probably signed up for like 5 users for $300 a month. And that's also where Salesforce started. And it was just a very simple, upload your contacts, your accounts, you can track your opportunities. Great. It worked perfect for a startup. And so we were early customers. And so we liked the product, which was a good hint. And then I also admired Mark Benioff already. And I remember by the time we partnered with him, 2003, 2004, he was planning to take the company public because he'd actually figured it out. But even Mark almost went bankrupt in 2001. He talks about it in his book, Behind the Cloud, because all those early .com customers, guess what happened to them in 2001? They all started going bankrupt. And Mark also realized having everyone on month-to-month credit card contracts was risky. So that's when he also learned, he shifted to annual upfront payments and started moving the company up market. And I think by the time we started partnering with him, I just went up to Mark. He was doing a world tour. I think he was in Chicago in 2003. I just walked up to him at the end of his presentation. They weren't public yet, but they were about to go public. And I was like, hey, Mark, I think we could partner. He's like, hey, great. I got a partner guy, Chuck, go talk to him. And, we're just spinning up a partner program. And, but even that didn't work well originally. So we partnered, but 2004, 2005, 2006, it was like we get maybe 5 or 10 joint customers, but they were all small. So it didn't really move our needle. But then 2007 was that magical year. I remember we partnered with them on Rico, eventually GE Energy, right? They moved way up market. and then they needed us. So we were there. But we also partnered with Microsoft. We partnered with Siebel, and we tried them all, frankly. So that was kind of the luck part. We tried also partnering with the ERP systems, the CRMs. We didn't know it was going to work. And then, but by 2007, it became clear, okay, Salesforce was probably number one. Siebel with their CRM and demand was trying to keep pace. They were number two. But so it kind of emerged, part skill, part luck. And then, but the second one, Steelbrick, we kind of knew, we knew Salesforce. They were still growing tremendously. That one, we just said, hey, let's just do Salesforce. And that obviously has the advantage. If you only have one channel partner and one platform partner, we could dial in the product for that platform, which we did. And our whole go-to-market was like, hey, just go to Salesforce events, go to Dreamforce, be on the App Exchange, just be in their flow. And that made the second company, so much more efficient. But without having tried everything in the first company, we would have never known that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's shift gears a little bit. So product market fit, you guys were smart. You've been smart about it in every company you've done, and focus on the customer, try to understand really what they're willing to buy. But let's talk a little bit about G2 and the scaling of G2. And obviously a very different business from what you guys did before, but or you could pick any of them. But like, what's that? What were the key things you did early within G2? Let's talk about G2. That once you found, this trust-based way to be able to provide, really valuable information about all of these solutions. What was the scaling unlock for you? What was the thing that started to really get that to go?
Yeah, and G2, it's really a software marketplace. When we first started it over 10 years ago, we called it Yelp for software. And, part of the inspiration was Yelp and consumer shopping, because, anything we buy as consumers, even 10 years ago when we were starting G2, you go online on Amazon and you always use peer reviews, online reviews to help you make buying decisions. And I remember in Bezos's biography, he actually invented online reviews way back in 1995 for books, because that's all Amazon was selling back then. And actually, what's also interesting is biography, the book publishers he was partnering with got mad at him, because they're like, Jeff, why are you allowing people to say nasty things about our books? I thought you're trying to sell them. But of course, Bezos had data back to the publishers. He was like, hey, look, a book, even with just one negative review, will convert more than a book with 0 reviews. And a book with 100 reviews, mostly positive, let's say 4.5 stars, will convert 30% better. And so he discovered, obviously, that online reviews give shoppers good information, give them confidence, and actually help them convert and buy faster. And what was kind of absurd to us when we started G2, we first had the idea in 2012, but there was no site like that for business software, for enterprise software. There was no peer review site. And our industry was relying on analyst reports, from the likes of Gartner, Forrester. And when I looked at that, I'm like, this seems like Encyclopedia Britannica, which obviously I still use in high school, and you remember it, right? Like in the 1980s, that was the best resource. There was no internet, right? There was no Wikipedia. So you go to the library and use beautifully bound books, and Encyclopedia Britannica had great authors. They'd publish it, updated every 2 years, but if you go there now, there'd be no invasion of Ukraine yet. It was always woefully out of date. And that's how we kind of saw the Gartner Magic Quadrants, for example, because the same thing. And we saw it as a vendor. It took us 9 years at Big Machines to get in a Gartner report. It took us 12 years to become the leader. And that was obviously bad for us as a vendor. We were desperate for validation, but it was even worse for our customers. And I mentioned eventually the GEs of the world, GE Energy, did discover us, these huge turbines that could be perfectly configured by Big Machines, by our software, because they were truly big machines. But GE said to us, wow, we wish we'd found you 3 years ago. We didn't even know you existed. So we saw this massive discovery problem also for software buyers. And that was also when we started G2 when Mark Andreessen, back to the inventor of the browser, he also said software is eating the world. And I think he anticipated that SaaS boom that's happened now in the past decade, where entrepreneurs have created purpose-built apps for every business problem, every vertical. And we also thought, wow, as software eats the world, you need a buffet. And that buffet needs the same reviews you have for meals on Yelp. And we thought, wow, Gartner's just, restaurant critics standing outside the restaurant, asking the diners if they like their food. We're like, why don't we just ask the people eating the food, right? Ask the user of the software. So that was the genesis of G2. And in some ways, like an obvious idea, just bring B2C shopping to B2B. But that was also the risk, right? At the beginning, I remember people were skeptical. Hey, would business people write reviews, right? It's more sensitive. The sales reps might be their friends, right? Their company might not allow them to write online reviews. So there were risks around, would business people write reviews? But the basic idea, to us seemed obvious, and it just seemed like it needed to be built.
Right. And so and then you got going, and of course, like a lot of great businesses like Airbnb, like that's not going to work, and now it's obvious. I mean, certainly too in G2's case, because it's essential, essentially, if you're working in a larger business, actually any size business who's buying software, you're going to G2 to figure out how to think about this problem. But you guys got going. Was the business model obvious early in terms of being able to make that case to the SaaS providers to use as a marketing tool? How long did you guys wait before you were able to build? Because the use case for the consumer of that information is obvious, right? I mean, it's a huge help, right? But was the business model right next to it, or did it take a little time to develop that, or how did that go?
Now, it took us a long time, and that honestly was a problem. We didn't know how we were going to make money. And first, we just tested this idea. We launched it, I remember, at a Dreamforce. We were just handing out $5 Starbucks card just to see if we could get business users to write CRM reviews. And but I remember my co-founder, Tim, he was our head of product at Big Machines, but he's grew up in Iowa, very frugal guy, but he's like, we got to make money. But he's like, I'm not getting a haircut till we have revenue. And he was also part of the early days of Big Machines. So we'd all learned a hard lesson. We got to find a way to make money, or this isn't going to be good. But I remember, he definitely looked like Jesus, and he's like an Iowa farm boy. So normally didn't have long hair.
Right.
But I think the first revenue we ever made, we were kind of created we had CRM reviews. That was the first category we did. And then we're like, let's create a downloadable report with more data on CRM, and we'll charge like $200 for that. And somebody downloaded it, but it was only $200. And then we actually realized that business model was flawed, because in that case, we're trying to charge the buyer of software. But then we kind of realized, and the whole internet is built this way, like Google, Facebook, right? And Tim Cook sometimes says, you're the product, you as a consumer, which means most of the information on the internet is all monetized through ads. We as consumers, we can get content information for free on the internet. And in return, we get targeted by ads, but the marketers love it, right? Because based on what we're reading online, where we're shopping, what we're saying online, it shows our intent on which products we're going to buy, certainly as consumers. And Insta is the best in the world at this. Mm-hmm. I think we both have daughters, and now it's almost ski season here in Colorado. Got the first snow, but now when I go to Insta, it'll be like my daughter's favorite ski jacket in her favorite color. I'm like, she's gonna love it for Christmas. And some people say, wow, that's creepy. But it's also great for consumers, right? Because I'm targeted with the perfect ad, and somehow they know what I want to buy right now. But again, that was like also missing in B2B. And so we realized that once we had great reviews and great content, that all the software marketers, the sellers of software, would want to be able to target our audience and see the intent. And today, G2 has over 100 million business software buyers a year coming. And obviously by what they're engaging with on G2, which categories they're looking at, what vendors are looking at, what products they're comparing, we get a great sense for their company's intent and what kind of software they're in the market for. And then marketers can target them right on G2, or they can use our intent data, target them through other channels like LinkedIn. And so they can much more efficiently target the right software buyer at the right time. And when everyone's trying to get more efficient and go to market, that obviously becomes critical. But honestly, it took us years to figure that out. And actually it took us so long that I co-founded G2, with, I mentioned Tim, he was our product leader, with Matt, our revenue leader. We also had Mike Wheeler, our CTO, who was coding it, and Mark, our designer. 5 of us actually worked together at Big Machines. So, but then 2 years into G2, I'm like, this thing is going to take forever. And Matt, our head of sales, so the same way, we can't make any money here. We got to go do something else. So Matt and I went to Steelbrick, and we're like, hey, Tim, you figure this out, because there was so little monetization. And then Tim did a great job, but it took another 3 years. It wasn't until 5 years in where we really had enough traffic, enough software buyers coming, enough reviews, enough of a brand where we could really monetize it. So it was a long, hard slog, but we did better than Big Machines. We stayed lean during that time because we also realized, I think the first 2 million, frankly, most of the money for G2 was our own because we'd sold big machines, so we had the money. But it wasn't until 5 years in that the revenue really started working. And it wasn't until 5 years in until we got our first institutional investor, which was Excel. And so I think we built it a lot smarter and partly because also, frankly, when we, at the beginning, venture capitalists has also gotten smarter. Because I remember the first year we tried to pitch a couple of VCs, and even as proven entrepreneurs, they were like, interesting, but we don't know if this is going to work in B2B. It's not just a SaaS revenue model. What's your revenue model? And we're like, I don't know. And by 2013, VCs were smarter. They wouldn't fund that until we had more proof. And so it was a very different journey.
Well, in a lot of ways, they were smarter and you were luckier, because if you had gotten the money earlier for the reasons we described, it's easy. There's, that's a crucible that doesn't benefit from necessarily more money. You can't necessarily find that answer. So when you guys, it's interesting you should say that in talking about intent. We have Violet, our growth data platform that we're selling. And, one of our challenges actually, as we go out to market, is I think we understand who cares about it and the roles and so on. But knowing when people care is really, really hard to know. And I wonder, one of the things that's happened because of COVID and because of, the way everything works now, like nobody reads their email, nobody really picks up the phone. You can't send a FedEx to the office and have somebody open it. So intent and contact is so much more difficult, right? And so I wonder whether or not, have you guys seen more people coming to G2 because it's a way to be able to more effectively find people who are going to pay attention, when they do reach out?
Yes. And I think we have all had that pressure in go-to-market, especially since 2021. In 2021, at least most people in tech, the money was flowing freely, although nothing like 1999 freely, but still, in the ZIRP, zero interest rate environment, we were all able to raise capital. And also investors were telling G2 and everyone else, right, hey, it doesn't really matter how efficient you are, right, just grow. And so that was obviously a great market, but then the market shifted for everyone. Like we saw it really in May 2022, where all of a sudden marketers that were spending wildly all of a sudden cut back, and we all got pressure from our boards all of a sudden. They were like, no, growth is great, but now we need rule of 40. We need positive EBITDA, right? It kind of went back to reality again. And so then I think marketers also realized that they really have to target the right buyer with the right message at the right time. And that's where we also partner with people like ZoomInfo. And frankly, Henry Schuck, their founder, CEO, he's also become an entrepreneur friend of mine. But he actually came up with that expression and why he wanted to partner with us. Because like the right person, obviously ZoomInfo would have data on that. Like know your target vertical, know your target ICP, your ideal customer profile. Are you targeting the CIO at Fortune 500 companies in insurance, let's say? So that's kind of the right buyer. Then you need the right message. And G2 can also help there because we always think the best message is like you and I, Paul, like as fellow entrepreneur CEOs, we'll probably ask each other like, hey, what are you using for CRM? What do you like? And if I say, hey, I love HubSpot or I love Salesforce, like you'll probably listen to that and vice versa. And so we think that's also the best content is like a peer message, at least in B2B. Hey, Paul, here's a peer entrepreneur. Here's all the value they're getting from that software. You know them, you trust them. You'll probably listen to that message. And then it's got to be at the right time. And if it's magically right when Paul is shopping for CRM, Exactius needs a better CRM platform. I'm obviously making that up. But if we see you spending a couple hours online researching it, you're comparing Salesforce and HubSpot on G2, we're like, wow, Paul and his company have really high intent. And now you can do really efficient targeting with the right message at the right time to the right contact. And I think that's the game now in go-to-market, right? You have to be digital. You have to use data. You have to use targeting. And AI can even automate that for you. And, people are talking about AI SDRs that could even take all that data, take that content about the right message, even certainly draft that email for you. And digital is also multi-channel now. And I think what marketers also like with G2 is retarget that audience, let's say on LinkedIn. And in B2B software, we find LinkedIn to be very effective. And we have a partnership with LinkedIn where you can take the G2 intent tied into a LinkedIn matched audience and automatically just retarget that audience and extend that audience, because if you see one person in account shopping, why not also target, other personas that are attracted to your product? So I think but that's the whole game now. Everyone has to be efficient and targeted. But it's hard to do, as you know. And I know that's also what you guys do, right? You have a data platform. You actually help brands do that because, most marketing teams struggle to tie all this data together and to do this, kind of digital targeting at scale.
Yeah, I mean, we have been doing that. We're helping people think about growth investment, and see attribution, and be able to have a full picture from, all the way wherever all the different places somebody's seeing it, and all the way back through to the rep actually closing a deal. And that's been really effective at helping people get their dollars out more efficiently. But so obviously product market fit has been a critical part of like the unlocks for you as you built these businesses. Is there an unlock that comes to mind during the growth phase? Like what was it? So you started to figure out how to make money. You got past the 5 or 6 years, you got to be whatever, 20 or 30 million rev. Did you guys, we often see with, a lot of companies we work with where it's working and then it just kind of flattens or it gets weird. And then you have to figure out the next group of things to be able to continue to scale. And you built, big businesses here. This is a lot of revenue. Can you think of an example of where you've found a problem in the growth phase where you guys got stuck and you're not sure exactly how it plateaued, and then you figured out the thing that got you to the next level?
Yeah. And we kind of hit that 2 years ago at G2.
Okay.
And now G2 is a good scale business. We're well over 100 million in revenue run rate. We have gotten to free cash flow and EBITDA, positive. And so we've built a real business. But what we did see, because we serve software marketers, a lot of them venture funded. And I mentioned this, all of a sudden in May 2022, all of a sudden our growth slowed way down. And I remember it distinctly. Until then, we'd kind of beaten plan, 8 or 9 quarters in a row. We'd become a unicorn. We were able to raise $157 million, and everyone's like, "Oh, wow, you're a genius," and then it felt like it for a few quarters. But then obviously, May 2022, everything changed, where all of a sudden there was this tremendous pullback, right? And we started hearing it from our board, where all of a sudden it was like, a year before, it was like, "Hey, spend whatever you need, just get your ARR year-over-year growth rate up. We don't care about efficiency," right? And all of a sudden it became, well, what's your LTV to CAC? How much sales and marketing, how many dollars are you spending to acquire each new dollar of net new ARR? So all of a sudden investors, boards, all started focusing intensely on those efficiency ratios. And so our customers also, mainly marketers, mainly CMOs. And today we serve 3,600 software companies, and our target persona is the CMO, or it could be their VP of demand gen. But all of a sudden the scrutiny went way up on all the marketing spend. And frankly, all of a sudden deals that we thought were going to close, all of a sudden pushed out. And frankly, all of a sudden our churn went from minimal to pretty significant. Especially we also serve SMB vendors, right? And frankly, some of our startup customers started going out of business, no more funding. And the bigger ones, even the enterprise, if you look at the companies like Salesforce, as a public company, right? All of a sudden they went from, let's say, 5% operating margin to 30%. And so the big enterprises that were also spending freely all of a sudden weren't, so it put tremendous pressure on us to where we had to create and prove higher ROI, because, the same value prop that, sold in 2021, by the end of 2022 wasn't selling anymore. And I think we're still a little bit in that, and in the sense, like, we're still not back to the same growth rates we had in 2021. We're still facing higher churn. So I'd say, and frankly, I think our product's gotten much better over the last 2 years. And we've worked hard to improve our attribution, improve our integrations to MarTech systems like 6 Sense to make it easier for our customers to get value. But we're still not back to growing the way we were, because I think the bar is still higher, and we haven't, increased our ROI enough yet to get back to those growth rates. So I'd still say an ongoing challenge that we faced. And frankly, I was at Dreamforce this year, the Salesforce conference, where there's tons of CMOs, CROs, fellow CEOs. And honestly, that's still true across our industry. And, and I also mentioned, like Henry at ZoomInfo, their public company, right? Their growth has really suffered. And so I think still feels like we haven't broken out yet to the growth rates we want. And we see the same in most of our customers.
Yeah. So one of the things that you guys have done, which was fascinating, I thought, was AI Monty. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and whether or not, I think there was some early success there. Has that turned out to be a valuable thing? Maybe you could tell us everybody what that is and how that's gone.
Yeah. Now, in our AI Monty is an agent that advises software buyers in real time, because we have seen the challenge. Now, G2.com, at the beginning, we only had one category, CRM. Now we have over 2,000 categories of software. And I know, Paul, you know a lot about MarTech, right? But in MarTech alone, there's probably over 100 categories, just different types of marketing software. And it gets really granular. Obviously, a few years ago, some vendors like Sixth Sense, Terminus started launching what we called account-based marketing. But now I think there's like 6 account-based categories, account-based orchestration, account-based execution, account-based selling. And it gets really confusing, even for a sophisticated marketer to know which category to shop in. And so sometimes now I say G2 is like a supermarket with 2,000 aisles. And that's just can be overwhelming for the software buyer. And we think AI and our AI Monty is built on top of ChatGPT in partnership with OpenAI. And generative AI is really good at making sense of unstructured data. And now G2 has, millions of reviews from software buyers where they tell us what business problems are they solving with what software, what use cases are they addressing, what ROI are they seeing. And so now we can take all that unstructured data with our AI Monty, really create a great software buying and selling matchmaker where Monty can just listen to the requirements of the business person. And if it's a CMO, they could just come in and say, hey, I'm looking for more efficient ad targeting. And then we can obviously ask more questions. Monty will ask them, what industry are you in? What's your company size? Where are you based? And frankly, if they just sign up with LinkedIn, we have a trusted integration, then we know all that data about them. Then we can give them contextualized recommendations with the AI agent. And in some ways, it's like a better Accenture consultant or Gartner analyst all in the sentient AI box. And so that is, I think, very promising. And probably the shift internet-wide that's happening where people are going, less to search and more to AI, whether they're using Gemini, ChatGPT, Anthropic. But we're starting to see that shift on G2. And it is a better experience, we believe, for the buyer. But then we can also help the seller, the marketer more, because now we've also created an AI Monty for sellers where a marketer can train Monty on their sales FAQs. And Monty can then be their virtual SDR, BDR right on the G2 site and drive the buyer further down the funnel, set up a demo, even close a deal. And so we do think AI is the matchmaker of the future. And I talked about, the growth challenges we've had, our industry's had. And I do think Monty, I believe, will be one of the things that leads us out of it. And in general, just AI, we now have 30 new AI software categories around G2, where all of a sudden, we have enterprise LLMs, we have vector databases, all this essential infrastructure software for AI that nobody knew about 2 years ago. And now we're also launching an enterprise AI agent builder category. There's all this excitement around Agentforce, or ServiceNow has their own agent platform. HubSpot has an agent platform. So that seems to be new arms race in tech. But the buyer is desperate to know which ROI actually really works, which ones will deliver ROI. And so we're also turning G2 into the trusted place to go for AI advice with Monty. And I think that is partly what will lead G2 and hopefully our whole industry back to growth.
So last question. Here we are. Both of us we're not 22 anymore. We have this next group of founders coming up in B2B software. What's your one piece of advice that you would give them as they figure out? And here they are in this is the pond they're swimming in. It's not 1999. It's kind of like 2003 maybe, or it's kind of like 2011 and where so what do you reckon? What would be your one piece of advice you'd give those guys or those women who are going out and trying to build something right now?
Don't quit.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you and I've done, Paul. And sometimes it takes a couple ventures, in many years.
Yeah, that's maybe a lot in a long time. Yeah.
But I think we've both done that, right? And ultimately, I have found, these entrepreneurial adventures, although they take many twists and turns, many ups and downs, right? I think ultimately it's very gratifying. And most entrepreneurs, and I think you and I have done this, usually you find a way to success. And, so I would say keep going. And I think usually, and then the other thing I had said earlier is like focus even more on your customers.
Yeah. I like that. I love that.
Because they will guide you And I wish I'd done that even more earlier, because if you can really focus on your customer, really listen to them, really deliver the ROI to them, then usually eventually the business will come around.
Well, it's funny you should say that's a perfect place to end. And I will tell anybody who is in their first entity, as I hear that, and I'm in Godard, you've been doing this for how long? A long, long time. And all these companies.
Years, yeah.
You're right. I've been doing it for 40 years. I'm like, you know what? Godard's right. I got to start to do more of that. Even now, I mean, incredibly. And it is incredibly sage advice. And it's also something that's easy to forget with everything else going on. I will leave you with this, which you'll appreciate, because I know you work with your dad too. And I did when I got started. And my dad didn't know anything about tech. And he was a very successful entrepreneur. He had done a bunch of different things. Some worked, some didn't, but had done very well. And this was in 1995, 96, something like that. And I had whatever we were working on at the time. And I'd come back and I'm like, I talked to this venture capitalist and I did this and whatever. And he'd always ask the same question. He'd always say, tell me about what's going on in the product, Paul. And then he was only a question. He wasn't a tell you what to do guy. He was, I'm going to ask you one question. And I'm like, well, and sure enough, it comes full circle because, he was right then, and knowing it had nothing to do with tech. This has been true in business all the way through. So anyway, perfect place to end. Thank you, Godard. This is awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul. Fun talking to you today.
Really fun.